Okay, so we are live for another live Q&A, and this time we're with Wombat, who is a former Hornet and Hawkeye and Hornet pilot. But yeah, Wombat, what's been happening on your end? It's been not too long, but yeah, it must have been a few things happening on your end.
Yeah, it's been a little busy trying to write. I'm trying to figure out this screen to not mess it up here. Well, I think I got it now. So a little bit of delay. It's been busy. Work's been busy. Home life's been busy. Trying to enjoy summertime as much as possible around here, and actually still try to do some writing and things like that, which is always a challenge. So but there's a lot. It feels like it's one of those things. It feels like a week goes by. Been trying to schedule this, and you'll be in. I'm like, oh, I totally forgot. So it never ends, unfortunately. But we're in there, so everybody's healthy, which is a good thing.
Yeah, so you were saying you were writing there. Is there another book in the works then?
Well, there's sort of two books. It's funny. I did the Mover and Donkey show last night. We talked about this. I have the third book in the trilogy Between Treason Flight and Vengeance Flight that's in the works, and then I'm also working on a separate project that is more of a leadership, call it motivational self help. I don't know what you would really put it into, but it's difficult because I've got to be in kind of a dark place to write the third book in this trilogy, but at a really upbeat place for the other one. So it's definitely tricky to skirt that line between the two. So that's where we're at on that. But
Yeah, so how's it like so guys, get your questions coming in on the side for Wombat, but yeah, how's like the two books going at the moment? It seems like I've seen a few things on social media. You seem to be doing quite well.
yeah, they're getting good reviews. They're people are positive feedback. As good as there can be. There's always some people that have negative reviews, but that's unfortunately the way that the world works. You can't make everybody happy, but for the most part, it's doing well, and it's gotten a lot of feedback. I think a lot of that comes from um, the original story being about the Hawkeye, which is a little bit different than what people normally write about. So that definitely helps. But yeah, it has been going good. So sorry, I feel like I'm distracted, but I'm trying to figure out the YouTube stuff to make sure I can see the comments and all that. And I'm not sure that I've gotten everything dialed in quite yet, but I'm working on it over here. So
Yeah, don't worry. So yeah, guys, get your questions coming in the comment box on the right hand side of the screen. But yeah, before we get into the Q&A, could you give us a bit of background in case people don't know about you, what you flew, where you started, and where you are now?
sure. So started out in the E2, the Hawkeye. Flew that for about 4 years in the Navy after flight school, and then had the opportunity to switch to fly F-18s. Flew that for another shoot, probably 4 years, and then in the middle of all that was a T-45 instructor, followed by T-45 instructor at the end, followed by T-45 instructor in the reserves, and I think I've taught at every base the Navy has T-45s in the States, and then went on to the airlines, flew for the airlines for for a few years. I mean, a good amount of time, probably about 7 years, and taught at the airline. And then eventually moved up about 2 years ago, upgraded to captain. Flew that for a little while on the Airbus, my new love that I'll never give up because I love that plane. And the uh, after I was able to be brought back into the training department, and now I teach as a captain instructor. So a lot of teaching. If you look at the now going on 22 years, I guess, of aviation time, a lot of that time was spent as an instructor. So I guess that speaks towards how much I enjoy teaching side of aviation on top of just the flying side of it. So hopefully I can keep teaching for a long time, and and stay in that role. Really is very rewarding.
Absolutely. But as you can see on the side there, Wombat, there's a couple of questions coming in already. So I'm going to let you loose. And guys, get your questions coming in for Wombat. I'm sure he's going to be happy to answer them. And yeah, Wombat, enjoy.
Okay, I will. I'll do my best here to not mess this up too bad, and do this and not be distracted. So just starting from the top, could the E2 be used? Sorry, this is the freckle pony. I might mess up some of these. I'll do my best, I promise. But could the E2 be used to guide a future long range air-to-air missile such as AMRAAM or AIM 260? That's a great question. I would honestly say this is probably not the media to talk about that, mainly because I don't want a bunch of black helicopters showing up on my front lawn because I want to go hang out with my kids this afternoon. But I can tell you that the capabilities of the Hawkeye are ever evolving, and it's really from when I first got on it and flying in 2004 to where it is today are very, very different aircraft and capabilities. So I truly believe that there's nothing the Hawkeye can't do. It's just an imagination thing of trying to implement it. So hopefully that answers it without answering too much. Neuropilot, who is the best? Who's the best pilot you've ever seen behind the boat? Well, obviously every Navy pilot's going to say that's themselves, right? But in all seriousness, there's so many great pilots. I've interviewed and I know you had on the show Nasty Manazar. What an amazing career he had in the fighter world with F-14s and F-18s and all the things he did. I really think that he had a knack for ball flying and flying behind the ship. And another one that I worked with was the skipper of the Red Bulls 232 when I was an E2 pilot. Hamster Hobson, he was actually a Blue Angel at one point in his career. I swear when he would fly behind the ship, it felt like he was just on autopilot the whole way. I think I saw one pass that was not a perfect pass out of him, and all the passes that I waved from him. So, there's that natural talent, which I love to sit here and say that I had that ability, but I can wholeheartedly say that I did not, nor do I ever have natural aviation talent. It's always been very hard work and a lot of luck that has kept me safe. So, Joe Minter, do you think the UAV? I'm sorry. Do you think a UAV could replace the E2 and the AWACS role? It's funny. When I was flying the Hawkeye, we would joke about that with the NFOs. It's kind of an ongoing joke as to, in reality, would they even know if we ever took off or landed? They could do their job from the flight deck. And in reality, it was all just good-natured humor. I don't think so. I think the capabilities of the Hawkeye lie far more in the men and women that fly it than just the systems. I've seen time and time again in my career where the either degraded systems or things just not going towards the plan, and it was the men and women in the back that stepped up and really flexed and made it happen. So I'm not 100% sure that could be done the same way without people right there. So I hope that answers that. I'll try to go in order here. Have you ever launched in an F-18 at maximum weight? Absolutely. Typically, you would do that. Now, I flew the Legacy, the Charlie model, single seat, but our combat loads were very close to max weight. We would have to do, what they would call a combat shot. And for the people that don't know, that's when you'll see them kind of raise the roof, is what we would call it. So you would come up to military power, check out all your systems, everything looks good, and you would go to full afterburner and then salute or turn your lights on and launch. And you would do that with those combat shots at max weight. You're really on the jagged edge of the catapult shot at that point. And it still was uncomfortable with how much it would settle off the cat, just due to limitations of how much they could load up the steam, vice what your aircraft could take. But yeah, those heavyweight launches it'd put you back in your seat, that's for sure. So Chelsea Dagger, do you always use the afterburner in the Hornet for a carrier takeoff? So that's interesting. Yes and no. So you don't have to, and it kind of goes to what I was just explaining. You don't necessarily have to do the afterburner shot as designed in a combat shot like that. But a personal technique of a lot of legacy Hornet pilots, and I see it on a lot of videos with the Super Hornet as well, is that, midway down the catapult stroke, you'll see the burners light. And that was something I did. That was my technique. It was taught to me by an instructor when I was going through training. And I'll tell you, it was something that just gave me that extra confidence going down the catapult that everything was going to work out. Was it necessary? Probably not, but I'd rather have the burner staged. And then as soon as you got off the carrier, pull the power back, and you were off on your flight. So that was the way I did it. I think a lot of people do it that way, but it's not necessary. We would very specifically work with the ordnance men and women and with the maintenance men and women to know the weight of the aircraft. And we would have to turn all that paperwork in before every launch. And then you can see it in YouTube videos where the pilots or the backseater, if it's two-seater, would roger up the weight board. So you knew on your knee board exactly what weight your plane was going to be for takeoff. And you needed to make sure that the shooters knew the exact same weight as well. So with that, as long as you were that weight, the steam catapults would be set for you and you would be fine. But the little extra boost of afterburners never hurt anybody is my take on that. So answer that. The John Minter, what squadrons did you fly in the Hornet? Primarily, so training, I went through VFA 106 on the East Coast for training. I chose there because I have family that lives on the East Coast. I wanted to finally be close to family at some point in my career. And then I ended up selecting to go to VFA 97 out on the West Coast and go from there. Did a deployment with them out there. We deployed on the Stennis at that point. So that was the one squadron I flew with in the Hornet. When I was flying the E-2, I was with VAW 17 in the Warriors. And then, like I said earlier, the T-45 world, I feel like I flew everywhere. Kingsville briefly as an instructor, then finished up my active duty time in Meridian, Mississippi. And then I actually went down to Pensacola, Florida, in the hangar shared by the Blue Angels, and taught backseaters for a few years as a reservist. So I've moved a lot is the answer to that. So let me see what else we got here. Sorry, I'm trying to get in a groove. It'll come to me. These are always difficult, I know. Neuropilot, do you think UAVs or UCAS will become virtual? I think I answered that before, but I do think there will be platforms that do it or possibly work as repeaters. But having the aircrew on station is just too valuable, especially in a dedicated combat environment where things change so fast. Every time you have a repeater to where the aircrew has to, wait for that signal or is disconnected from the fight, I think it just degrades the capabilities of the men and women that are trained to do what they do, and they truly are. I've seen amazing things both in combat, search and rescue, and just normal carrier ops from the NFOs in the back of a Hawkeye that blow my mind. I love to give them a hard time. I truly love to give NFO a hard time, but the job they do back there is something I could never do, especially to the level at which they perform it. It's amazing to me. So Here's a favorite question: which is easier to land on an aircraft carrier, Freckle Pony? The E2 or the Hornet? And I'll tell you, without a doubt, no question, the Hornet is easier. Um, for a lot of reasons, and a lot of things that people don't realize. And when I was an instructor in Meridian, specifically after having completed 2 tours, one of which with the Hawkeye, one of which with the Hornet, I would get this question a lot. Not with just which is easier to land, but also which, what was easier to fly, what was more fun to fly, etc. What did I like more? Um, and the it was a very interesting answer because I don't think a lot of people who haven't flown it really understand the difference. And the biggest issue, because people think, oh, the Hawkeye comes aboard the ship slow, so it's easier. And it does, but it still comes aboard the ship at about the same speed that a Super Hornet does. So it's not like we're a helicopter hovering. Like you're moving at the ship. Um, the wingspan is what gets you on the Hawkeye. So I've spoke about this before. 80-foot wingspan, 85-foot landing area. You've got 2.5 feet off center line, and that's it on a center line that's constantly moving to the right and likely pitching and heaving and Dutch rolling. There's not a lot of window for error at all. And the problem with that is while you are approaching the ship slightly slower in the Hawkeye, it gives you more time to have to figure out this lineup. And it really is, it's a daunting task. And it's funny, in my current job as an instructor at the airlines, we get obviously a lot of different backgrounds. And if I ever fly with somebody in the sim or in the world in the plane that has flown an E2 or a C2, I could tell because they land on center line perfectly every time. Now, on the flip side, in the Hornet, especially the Legacy Hornet, which I flew, center line is important, but it's not. There's a little bit more slop there, and why it's important is the way that the lens works on the ship. Is you're really only getting accurate glide slope information if you're on center line. So so if you're left or right of center line, you're really not you don't know if you're perfectly on the glide path or not. And you're also in a Charlie model, you're approaching the ship probably close to 30 or 40 knots faster than the E2 or a Super Hornet or something like that. So that adds to it because things happen a lot faster. And then additionally, if you get with the E2, you have a propeller, you have instantaneous thrust, that helps a ton. You have a lot of P factor, but you have a lot of thrust. In the Hornet, depending on what landing weight you're at and your loadout and your drag, you could potentially get behind the power curve and add power and just not go anywhere and get yourself into a bad situation. So challenging. That being said, I still think that my first in the Hornet was easier than my last landing in the Hawkeye at the ship. So I hope that answers that. Chelsea Dagger, would you rather fly the E2 or Hornet? That's a great question. It depends. It really depends. The Hornet, that's tough. The Hornet I flew being single pilot, single seats, multi-mission, it was a blast. It was the coolest sports car that you can imagine, the most thrust. It could do anything. The problem was outside the plane. It's not really a problem. It's just the nature of the mission. The amount of time you prepared for flights and the amount of time you had to brief and mission plan and then do the mission and then debrief the mission and all this, it really took away a little bit from the flying. But it's hard to say that the Hornet was not a blast to fly. I would love to go fly a Hornet again and pull 7.5 Gs and prove to myself how old I really am. But on the flip side, the Hawkeye is a different animal. And I would not turn down a flight in a Hawkeye either because it's evolved so much. When I flew it, they were old steam gauges. A lot of the advancements weren't there, even in the avionics and the flying. I think it'd be really cool to to get into one, and it would be extremely humbling. I've lost over the years a lot of the skill set that I built up in that plane to be able to fly it as well as I think that it would be extremely humbling. I have not used rudder control like I had to use in the Hawkeye in a long time. The plane that I currently fly and the Hornet, when I flew it, both auto trimmed for you, and the Hawkeye very much does not auto trim for you. So that adds a lot of workload. Um, the there's very much it's a humbling job, but it is an extremely rewarding uh, job as well. That I think I would miss it, or I do miss it. Would love to get a flight. Either one. Sorry, I went down a nostalgic world there, and now I got to get back to some of these other questions. So, time to fly. Did you find the step up from your training to Hawkeye a big step or to fit? What were the biggest challenges? I thought it was an extremely big step up. And for people that aren't familiar with the pipeline at the time, and these are ever evolving, right? Because the Navy changes their training and how they do things. But I actually started out flying in the Air Force as a joint training tour. So I was a Navy pilot flying at an Air Force base, and I started in the T-37 Tweet. So very underpowered, twin seat, twin engine jet. Fun to fly. Didn't have to worry about factor and all that. So, but it was underpowered. It was a great little trainer. And it took a guy like me with zero flight time and got me to a point where I could solo and move on to my next aircraft. The next aircraft being the T-44 that I flew down in Corpus Christi. So now we're talking twin engine. I've never flown a prop before. There was a lot of things I had to learn there. Working with a crew, there was definitely a lot of challenges. And I felt like I was behind a little bit because the men and women coming out of Navy primary had flown a T-34 most. So they had flown a propeller plane. I remember systems day in the T-44 where they talked about the engines, and they said, okay, it's like two T-34 engines. Any questions? And I raised my hand in the back of the room, and I said, I have a couple because I don't understand what the fan is on the front of them. So it took some work to get me to beat on that. And then you go right back and you go to the T-45 single engine jet. Obviously centerline thrust. Not the most powerful jet in the world, but that sole purpose as an E-2 pilot was to teach me how to land on the ship. So I had to go through that whole thing, fly formation, learn how to land on the ship, do that. And then you step up to this Hawkeye that, I've enjoyed with my writing and things like that, the ability to bring the Hawkeye more to the public, because it really is a plane that, other than a very small scene in Top Gun Maverick, you just don't hear about. There was movies out there back in the day that featured him, but they're never really featured as anything other than a support role, which they are, and I understand that. But you step up to this plane, and I mean, just as you walk up to it, it's massive. And then the systems are insane. Grumman built, Grumman Iron Works. They overbuild everything, which is fantastic. Everything is hydraulically fed in the plane to include things like the windshield wipers. I mean, it's insane. You're just not prepared for that level of intricacy in an aircraft. And then the thrust is insane. The plane is highly overpowered. And, I remember the first day where we're going to do single engine work, and you're in the and this, right? The instructor's gone over with you. Okay, I pull the left or right motor back. Which rudder are you going to put in? Okay, you tell him. Okay, so we're chair flying this whole thing, and then we go to fly, and in the pattern, he reminds me, okay, we're going to pull back this motor, which means you're going to put in what rudder, and we go over it again, and then when he does it, the whole plane yaws, and I'm looking out the side window because I still don't put in enough. So it was a very humbling aircraft. It took more than a few hundred hours to really get comfortable and good. But once you got good at it, she was a blast to fly. I mean, all that power is fun. I've talked on different channels on this channel about, my flybys in it. And it's just, I think it's an airplane that does a lot of stuff you don't expect. And that is a really, really cool thing. And I think that gets a lot of attention, which is fun. Plus, if you ever see an E2 at an air show, they are um, fantastic because they provide a lot of shade for people to sit under. So it's a fan favorite at air shows as well. So um, Neuropilot. Let me see. Hold on. Okay, so with the risk of a pilot accidentally pulling back the power during the launch, I thought your hand would be on the towel rack. So different planes are different things. So what I think the question is getting uh, at is you take that catapult shot and the risk of pulling the power back. And most aircraft that are carrier based aircraft have a lever that pulls out, and you would like the T-45, for instance, you'd push the power up, and there'd be this little lever that you would pull out, and you'd hook your fingers over the lever. So even if with the jolt of the catapult shot, you couldn't, you just wouldn't be able to pull it back without letting go of that. The Hawkeye had one, and you can see it in the better YouTube videos out there where it comes up in front of the throttle quadrant and flips back, and as the pilots bring their hand up, they hook their fingers into it to hold it there. So most planes have that feature because you don't want to pull the power back. Now the Hornet was a little bit different, and it has with afterburners it's a little different. And the Hornet is the only plane I've flown where you would put your hand on the towel rack, but that's your stick flying hand, not your throttle hand. So different systems there, but with the Hornet being fly by wire and being auto trimmed and having a trim setting for launch, it was far safer to have your hand up on the towel rack. And that's why you see Hornet pilots, Super Hornet pilots do that, because initial jolt would basically, it would program in the backstick to climb you away from the water. And then you would put your hand on the controls and start flying. Hawkeye didn't have anything like that. T-45 didn't have anything like that. So in the Hawkeye, you would kind of guard the yoke. And in the T-45, we would teach the students to just kind of put their hand behind the stick, because you don't want to have the shock factor where you pull up, because you could potentially stall. And we did have that happen with one of my students who almost had to eject, but luckily was able to fly away, but pulled a full stick aft on a catapult shot, on their first catapult shot. So that was a very scary circumstance, frankly. So sorry, moving on. So Freckle Pony, I appreciate all the questions. What was your favorite carrier to operate from, and what was your least favorite? I think carriers are a lot like aircraft in that you have your first love. And I did my first 3 deployments were on the Nimitz. So to me, the Nimitz was my home more than home was for my E2 time. And so I always have, a kind of a love relationship for the Nimitz. I don't think when we were there, we really had an appreciation for how good it was. We got all these awards on the Nimitz, and it was, a lot of people that have watched my stuff. That's when Nasty Manazer was the skipper. That's when Trim Downing was the CAG. We were just this team, the barbed wire team, that just worked together so well. It made for such a great work environment. When I moved on and we moved to the Stennis was fine. I did a deployment on the Stennis. The aircraft carriers, within their own classes, really different enough that you'd notice it. There's little things here and there, but nothing major that you truly notice it. But the Stennis was a cool ship, but it really made me appreciate the Nimitz for all the good things. The food, it was an older ship, but they kept it up. And I think a lot of that more so goes to speak to the commanding officer and the climate they set of the ship. And I see that even now when I, watch people on social media that are in charge of aircraft carriers or former squadron mates of mine that have moved on to that level. You can tell that they do a good job because they care, and therefore the ship runs well, which is no small feat. When I became a T-45 instructor, especially in Meridian, my job was to be the wing LSO. So I was in charge of all for 2 years, I was in charge of all the carrier qualifications for the students. So we would go out almost every 6 weeks to a different carrier between San Diego, Key West, and Jacksonville, Florida. So I felt like I have traps on all of these carriers, but you were never on them really long enough, and you were kind of a guest. It didn't really feel like home. So I think over my career, the Nimitz will definitely uh, be the one that will always be my love, just because I spent so much time on it. So I got to read some of these long ones. I'm sorry; these are good questions, but I don't want to skip over too much here. Um, so this is a good one. The Frekampuni. If I'm saying that right, I apologize if I'm not. What's your opinion on the Chinese efforts for their carriers? This would be, well, I mean, their efforts are their efforts. I don't, obviously, I'm American, uh, and I love this country, and I've served for this country. Um, the We've had a huge learning curve when it comes to aircraft carriers, and we still are having a learning curve as we evolve into aircraft carriers, the Ford class and things like that. So what do I think of their efforts? Well, I think their efforts are, every major superpower country, they can understand in 2024 the benefit of an aircraft carrier, the benefit that if you need to have aircraft and troops in an area quickly, the aircraft carrier is hard to beat. Can you sustain it long time? Well, that's where I think we do a great job with having the Air Force that can get in there and, once they build their golf courses and chill their beers, kidding, of course, but they can come in and really have the sustained efforts where we could be more that flexible, first line of defense. So I think every country that's a major superpower they're going to look at an aircraft carrier and see the benefits. Their learning curve is going to be huge, because, like I said, it's huge for everybody, and there are so many things that go into carriers. And for somebody that's never done it, and you can watch the videos, and I think this is really cool. We were talking last night on the Mover and Donkey show about DCS and about Microsoft Flight Simulator and how it's motivating the next generation of pilots. But I also think there's so much on social media now. There's so much on YouTube. I'm almost jealous of these pilots because they can make the greatest cruise videos that they'll always remember, because of how good cameras are and GoPros and all this stuff. But you could see so much, and for somebody that's never been on an aircraft carrier, it just looks normal. It looks like a really small space, but everything just kind of works. But there are so many layers of training, and overtraining and redundancies that have to go into making it look like that, controlled chaos, that it takes time to get that. And it takes active duty Navy crews time to get that. I mean, our workup cycle is such that, we're not firing on all cylinders right off the bat. And that's kind of the workup. So start from scratch that's going to be, tough, and it's going to take a lot of work, I think. And I think they're probably dealing with that right now. So, let me read this one. Antonio, have you ever been in a situation to eject? If no, did you exercise to know when to eject safely in the moment? Unfortunately, I have been very close, more than once. I've never had to pull the handle, thank God. I hope I never find myself in a situation where I do. The ones that I was the closest at having to eject, I didn't have time to really think about it, to be honest with you. The worst situation from a mental standpoint that I had was a flight in T-45s in Meridian, Mississippi. It was a night formation. I was the lead aircraft, and I took off at night with my buddy in the second aircraft with a student. And as soon as I took off, my engine started vibrating. Single engine jet. It's nighttime. Massive vibrations. I turned to a low key like we would train to. Normally, those maneuvers are done during the day, but I did not think the airplane was going to hold together. And so I just went for it. I figured that was my best chance. I would get to high altitude. But as I was on downwind and I had the throttle set, so I wasn't, I was doing everything by the book. I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to have to eject out of this aircraft. This engine's going to seize, and a T-45 with one engine, if it seizes, you're done. You're out of there. And I literally had time to take my knee board off my knee, off my leg, and stow it. I stowed my bag, and that was very hard because I didn't want to pull the handle. I didn't want to have to get out of this plane. I knew it would hurt. I knew that I would end up in trees somewhere or some area with a bunch of alligators at night that I didn't want to be in. But I just kept flying the jet, and it worked out. I got it on the runway, and they actually wanted me to taxi it back at idle, which I did. And I went home for the night. And the next morning, the maintenance guys told me that they suspect that if the engine ran for 15 more seconds, it would have seized. So I lucked out there. You do a lot of training in the military when you fly on ejection seat aircraft on when you need to get out. One of the things was pilots for, they try to save the aircraft. They try to do too much until they get themselves out of an ejection envelope. And I can honestly say that it is something I'm glad I never had to do. And I have friends who've done it. I have friends that have not done it, unfortunately. And it's a situation that I think it's such a dynamic situation that until you're faced with it, you're either going to do it or you're not. The hardest ones, though, were the ones where I had time to think about it. And I'm happy that I don't have to worry about that anymore. So, Jacob, how low have you ever flown the Hornet? Hi from the Netherlands. Hi, I appreciate you watching. The lowest I've ever flown the Hornet was officially 100 feet. We do that. Sorry, I just lost where I was at. At 100 feet, when we go through training in the Hornet, you would go down and do low levels at 100 feet just to get comfortable with it. Typically fly at 200 feet though. And it's funny when you go down to 100 feet and then you come back up to 200 feet, it feels like you're so far off the ground. So it's really more of an appreciation. That being said, there's been times where I have been lower than 100 feet briefly. And one of which was an incident out in Fallon where I was avoiding a midair and almost ran into my skipper by mistake, and I pushed over the nose to miss his aircraft and had to do a full backstick recovery. And I believe the rat out on that one pulled the tapes. It was less than 50 feet. So that's one I try not to think about too much because it might keep me up at night a little bit. But routinely, we don't necessarily fly that low, but that's the training in the Hornet was down 100 feet, which is a very cool thing to do at 600 knots. That's for sure. So, so moving on, Christy, does it take away from the Hawkeye's mission to use it land-based? Most countries that bought it don't have an aircraft carrier. I don't necessarily think that it does. And maybe I'm being a little bit cocky here. I think the Hawkeye is truly designed for the mission that the United States uses it for, and how it integrates into a carrier battle group. I think that has taken it to a level from where it started, which, originally the plane was solely designed to detect long-range Russian bombers coming at the carrier group. And when you think about that to, all the way to where we're at now with the capabilities of it and capabilities that I don't even know anymore because I've been out of it so long, it really has grown quite a bit. And that growth has come around being the integral part of the carrier battle group. So I think for countries that buy it that are land-based, you're going to get some amazing features. It's really going to enhance your battle space management and all that. But I don't think it's going to quite do it as well unless it's integrated into that carrier battle group, in my opinion. But that's also the way we used it. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to read. Some of these are long. Have you ever had a dirt bike? I have not had a dirt bike named Combat Wombat. That would be awesome. Can you tell us, this is from Antonio, can you tell us the most memorable moment you had in any aircraft? Oh boy. I've talked about some of these before. I think honestly the most memorable and rewarding was an alert launch in a Hawkeye in the Pacific Ocean, where the we were operating along with the Stennis, and for people that watch other shows and know Gonky, he and I have been friends since day one of flight school in Pensacola, and he was operating in VFA 146 on the other aircraft carrier. And I wasn't scheduled to fly. We weren't scheduled to have an E2 airborne for this mission. And our CAD came in and said that two Hornets had hit each other and had a midair. And for some reason, I felt like it was Gonky. I don't know why. I call it just a long friendship. And he asked me and somebody else in the ready room and our OPSO how quickly could we get an airplane airborne for search and rescue and coordination. And we just pulled together the crew that was sitting there, myself and my good friend, co-pilot, and three backseaters hopped in, and we launched that plane in under 15 minutes and got airborne and stayed airborne for basically as long as the plane could. And the coordination effort of the NFOs in the back is something truly amazing, to be able to manage all the tanking assets to get both of those pilots back on deck safely. One of which diverted to Guam immediately. Didn't know if they'd have enough gas to get there, but knew they couldn't come back to the ship. The other of which decided to come back to the ship, to the Stennis, and I actually had a hook slap, as we refer to it in the LSO world, where the stinger of their tail hook hit the back of the ship, knocking it off. Now they can't trap aboard the ship. So then we had to coordinate, well, as a crew, to get this plane with enough tankers all the way to Guam, and both of them landed safely. And that was probably one of the most rewarding flights I did. Come to find out afterwards, in the small world that we live in, the pilot, one of the pilots, became my XO when I was a Hornet guy. And Gonky was not either one of the pilots, but he was scheduled to fly on the flight and had to sick out because he had an ear block. So it's crazy how the world works, and how close those friendships are. But the crew that night, in the back of that Hawkeye, did some amazing things to coordinate so many tankers. I mean, we were tanking the tankers to try to get them. It was insane. But that was the world you lived in when you would operate in what they call blue water operations without really suitable divert fields. Um, so I think that was my most memorable. There's been of other situations, but that was one that I can definitely hold my head high and know I was part of one of the best crews that night that saved some lives, which was really cool. So, um, Neuropilot, not sure if you mentioned it, but talk about being an LSO. Well, trust me, every LSO talks about being an LSO because we're the best looking people on the flight deck, right? So it was a job I did. It was a job that drove me to want to be an E2 pilot instead of over being a C2 pilot, because I wanted to. I had such an appreciation going through training. Um, I'm not, nor have I ever been, naturally gifted in sports. I don't consider myself anything more than average intelligence, probably slightly below average, with maybe a slightly above average sense of humor. Um, the fact that my LSOs in training could take a guy like me with zero aviation experience and aptitude, and in a short amount of time, relatively speaking, teach me how to land an aircraft carrier on a boat, blew my mind. And if I ever had the opportunity to pass that on and to give back, I wanted it. And as soon as I got to Me Too Squadron, I told anybody who'd listen that I wanted to be an LSO. Um, and luckily, they needed somebody, and I became one. And then just the stories and the things that I got to experience because of that, and also additionally, I think the ability to go on and transition to the F-18, largely in part of that experience as well. It really was an amazing thing to do, and I was very happy the to have that opportunity. So one of the cool jobs I've had, one of the things that I will never forget is as being an LSO, and then to have my last active duty job being in charge of taking students to the boat for the first time. That there's nothing cooler. I still to this day will run into my students at the airlines, and they'll thank me for keeping them safe, and that's just a cool experience to see that. So, all right, sorry, moving on. You guys got me nostalgia here. John Minter, given the chance, would you like to fly the Super Hornet? I've been coined as saying there's nothing super about a Super Hornet, just because I'm, by trade I flew the Legacy Hornet, and that's it's just how it is. There's a little bit of a rivalry there. That being said, if the Navy called me today or anybody else and asked me if I want to fly in a Super Hornet, I absolutely would. That'd be a blast. It's just like everything with technology. It's gotten so much cooler than what I flew, and it's very much a situation where I would love to fly that jet. It's a great multi-role jet, and I think it's only going to get better down the line, frankly. So yes, I would love to, given the chance. Chelsea, did you ever have to single engine land the Hawkeye or Hornet? Both, actually. The Hawkeye, I believe I had 2 single engine landings, and the Hornet, I could remember at least one. It's very interesting. The Hawkeye was more challenging just due to the P factor. And unfortunately, it was the left motor both times, which is the critical engine, which makes it a little bit more challenging. The Hornet, honestly, it wasn't inherently difficult. It was just one of those situations where you were just underpowered, and you had to be really, really, really careful to make sure you stayed ahead on the power, because you weren't going to get it back. The engines took too long to pull up the engine in that case. So you just really had to stay ahead of the aircraft, like any aircraft. So I think that was my single engine time. I have briefly even flown a T-45 no engine because I had to shut one down once and relight it, which I don't recommend in a single engine aircraft. So they don't make great gliders. John, what Navy aircraft, past, present, that you haven't flown would you like to fly? So the easy answer is that I did get a ride in one as a midshipman, and they're amazing. I was in the back seat, full combat shot. It probably solidified everything I wanted to do in naval aviation. But I also think that the A-6 Intruder would have been an amazing aircraft to fly. The mission that the men and women did in that plane was amazing. The Vietnam era missions, the Iron Hand mission, just a cool story. And again, Grumman aircraft. So I think that would have been those would have been my choice to fly. So Franco Pune, would you like to get a chance to fly the F-35 and perhaps the Raphael? I'd like to fly the Raphael. I don't know about the F-35, to be honest with you. At some point, I'm sure it's really cool to fly. But at some point, I think that it's just not me anymore, and what I enjoy. I grew up in kind of old school aircraft. Even the F-18 was it was a Lot 12. It had glass gauges, but it was very rudimentary compared to what we have today. So I think the F-35. Would I turn it down? No, but I think I would be more impressed with a ride in a Tomcat, or a flight in a Tomcat, just because of the old schoolness of it. So, sorry, I hope I'm not going through these too quick. David Smith, I watched a plane landing in bad weather, and what struck me was how little time the LSOs had to pick up the plane, got it down. Are there procedures? Yeah, so low vis, it's tricky, and we typically don't land on the ship with our taxi lights on because, well, you don't taxi very far, so you don't need it. But the other reason you don't land with it on the ship is because right next to your taxi lights are the AOA, angle of attack, repeater lights for the LSOs to be able to see if you're on glides or on speed, fast or slow. And so if the taxi light's on, you really can't see that. In really low visibility and really bad weather, we will make a call over the controlling frequencies and say 99 taxi lights on. And that is basically telling all the pilots in the overhead stack, turn on your taxi lights because we're going to need that to get you on board. It's never a call you want to hear when you're in the overhead stack or the Marshall stack, because then you know the weather's bad. But the CATSI controllers would bring the aircraft down and talk them down to the window. And as soon as we would see the taxi lights, we would usually say paddles contact, meaning, hey, I see you, even though you don't see me. And then we would start talking to the pilots, and you would have the two LSOs would get in sync. The primary LSO, being the one that's the closest to the landing area, is concerned about glide slope. And then the backup LSO would be watching the center line on the camera for what they could see with the taxi light. And we would get into a sync, and it was something we were trained extensively on, where you would essentially lip lock the pilots until they call the ball. And even a lot of times when they call the ball, you would to them because it was such bad visibility. There were times flying in the Hawkeye where we would get to 3/4 of a mile, call the ball, and the call would be clear. And that basically would be me telling the LSO that I can't see the ball. And then usually that would be followed with them talking us down. I have had instances in the Hawkeye and the Hornet where I was clear a ship, meaning I couldn't even see the ship at 3/4 of a mile, let alone the lens. Those were definitely taxi light on. There was at least one notorious one where I still get some hard times for it because I called Clara ship. They talked to me the whole way down. We hit the deck, and I called the ball right as we hit the deck. And the LSOs started laughing because it was really irrelevant at that point that I could see the lens. So, but that's basically what we would do. And we would just get into this sequence of, you're on glide slope, you're on center line, and the two LSOs would work together to basically fly that plane down. Or if we couldn't get them in a safe place to land, we would wave them off and try again. So definitely earned your pay on those days on the LSO platform. Very stressful, but a very rewarding job too. So, okay, let me see if I can scroll down here and not lose everything. Oh, hold on. So Neuropilot talks about a story I told last night about keeping an F-18 off the ramp. For the people that didn't see the show, that was something I'll never forget. It was a beautiful, clear day. Amazing. And we had 12. I'll never forget it. I was the controlling LSO, and we had 12 F-18 Charlies that were going to come aboard. I mean, it was very rare to have, all the same planes. There was no Hawkeyes, no Super Hornets, no Prowlers, nothing, no COD. 12 Charlies. And every one of those came down and flew a perfect pass into the 3-wire. And we were getting ready to close up and go downstairs because in between each recovery, all the LSOs would have to walk the length of the ship and debrief each pilot on their pass, and then go put the grades in the computer, and then grab something to eat or drink real quick, and then go right back up for the next recovery. So kind of never ended the whole day. And I was on the control, and the last Hornet was coming around, and we know who the pilots are. And this pilot was amazing. It's great stick. And he's coming around the 45, and I give him the cut lights, telling him that, hey, you're cleared to land. And he's flying fine. And, some of the LSOs, which was habit, it's like, okay, we're done. Like, let's start going down. And there was something about the aircraft that looked off to me. And I can't put my finger on what it was, to be honest with you. And I immediately hit the wave off lights and started screaming at him to wave off in full burner. And he did. And he got over the ramp, but he still caught the 1-wire, which is insane. And we finished, and everybody kind of looked at each other like, what the heck was that? And we went downstairs, and the pilot, I knew him, but he walked right up to me, didn't say a word, and just hugged me. And I still get kind of worked up about it. That's about as close as I ever want to see somebody crashing an airplane that close to me. But that was the job, and that was to be expected in the job every time you went up there. It's not a job, not that anything in naval aviation is something you can take lightly, but it is not a job that you can really let your guard down on, um, just based on how quickly it can go bad. So that was the story from last night for anybody that saw that. So um, I might have been here. I apologize if I am. Uh, Neuro, do you think the Navy should send their legacy and block F-18Fs to Ukraine for the fields? I don't know. I don't really get into the politics of that, to be honest with you. I operated aircraft on aircraft carriers, and if you don't have an aircraft carrier, it's definitely not my area of expertise. So, I believe it or not, I'm one of those pilots that, for the most part, if it's not my area of expertise, I try to keep my mouth shut on it. The Franco Pini, the final countdown or the original Top Gun. Well, obviously, everybody likes the original Top Gun. I just happen to take a little bit of uh, pain in the fact that in the final countdown, what nobody cares about is the fact that the Hawkeye launched and, and then the ship went back in time. Nobody talks about what happened to that Hawkeye crew, right? I mean, they're the true heroes. Like, where's their tribute, right? So, but I do like the final countdown. Antonio, do you have any regrets about your career in the Navy? Did you miss something that you really wanted? One of the things that I really can honestly say from the bottom of my heart that I'm proud of is that even though my career may not have gone textbook and it isn't the way that I think anybody would necessarily write a naval aviation career, I have absolutely zero regrets. I got to do such a cool amount of different things between teaching and LSO and Hawkeye and Hornet and different types of deployments and different types of ships and living in different parts of the country, that all the bad and all the negative stuff, it, it was worth it because where I sit now, and that's really cool. And that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to do the Hornet transition. Is I tell people I didn't want to be an old man one day sitting on a rocking chair wondering if I could have done it. I have no doubt that I could, because and that's a huge feeling to not feel like you have to prove something to somebody. Everything I set my mind out there to do, I accomplished. Might not have been the smoothest or the easiest way to do it, or the smartest way to do it all the time, but it was a situation where I did it, and I can look back on it and teach my children that lesson that, if you set your mind to something, you truly can accomplish it, no matter what the adversity in front of you is. So I don't, it's crazy to say, but I don't have any regrets. This might be the last one. We'll see if any more pop up. But Canuck Flyer, would you rather take a controlled ejection out of an aircraft or attempt to use the escape rope in A-21? That's a good question. I think either one I'm probably going to hurt myself on, but I think I would still go with the escape rope because I'm fairly confident that I can climb down a rope from altitude or from that height. But an ejection is going to hurt, and it's going to hurt going out, and it's going to hurt on the landing. I still have memories of the no kidding, the parachute landing fall training in flight school and how much it hurt my knees and ankles, uh, that I never want to have to come down in a parachute. So I think I'll take the escape route in a 321. I'd prefer not to do either. I'd love to have a boring airline career if that's at all possible. So, Neuropilot, have there been times where you're watching an airliner come into land and be tempted to wave them off? Sure. Sit at the hold short and watching planes land, and there's some challenging conditions out there, and I don't want to take away anything from airline pilots. It's a completely different world, and and it's a lot bigger aircraft, and there's a lot at stake. And I think one in the airline world that as pilots we take for granted is that it works right all the time. Um, but there's 200 plus people behind you that have their lives in your hand, and you've got to be good at all the time. And that's the advice I give newer pilots is, you've reached the point in your career and that's amazing, but don't ever stop, because um, your bad day could be tomorrow and your next landing could be it. And you have to stay on guard, because those people, those families, you owe it to them. 100%. Our job as airline pilots is 100% point A to point B safely. And if point B happens to be where the passengers bought a ticket, that's extra credit, because that's not my concern. My concern is making sure that you're safe and you can go to your families or go on your vacations. So I do want to wave them off sometimes. I've had to do it where the pilot I'm flying with, whether it's the captain when I was the first officer or now the first officer, wasn't a good landing, we just tell them to go around. And frankly, I've had situations where I've had to go around flying. So that's just how it is, and it's part of aviation. Sometimes we joke in the airline industry, since we get paid by the hour, that sometimes your smartest decision is the one that makes you the most money, and sometimes that's going around and trying again. Um, so it happens. John, what was your favorite port that you visited on the carrier? Well, Australia was my best. It was my first port, my favorite port. Um, Perth was amazing. I'd love to go back to Australia. I want to take my family to Australia. It was amazing. I did a lot of what we would call Westpacks, where you would sail out of San Diego and end up uh, getting into the Persian Gulf via going past Hong Kong, Singapore, stuff like that. I have fond memories of Hong Kong and Singapore. Singapore is an amazing city, beautiful city, super clean city. And Dubai was one that we would try to go into when we were in theater, which was really cool just for what it is. But Australia is my love. I only got to do it once. I will be back um, to Australia, that's for sure. So, um, what's the interaction like between aviators, surface, and sub? The Navy's always about animosity. It is a sports team rivalry where every one of those groups you mentioned and others are better than everybody else, and we all know it. And it's one of those situations that it's good natured, right? It's like family. Like, I could talk bad about my family, but you better not talk bad about my family. I think the Navy's a lot like that. I can give E2NFOs a hard time, but if you do it, we're going to have some problems, and that goes to different communities as well. On that. So, um, what's this one? My friend was landing in Dulles in a 787. They were joking after 3 missed approaches with the captain of the FO she was training that the tower teased her about whether it was bad. I'll tell you, we were having this discussion. Friend of mine just upgraded to captain. She was a Navy Super Hornet pilot, and we were talking about the firm landing versus the smooth kind of rolling it on landing in an airliner. And it's one of the things, like, as a passenger, I get it, right? You almost don't want to feel the landing, right? It's that, oh, that must be the best pilot if they can just roll it onto the runway. It doesn't even feel like you touch down. There's a lot to be said, and I'm not just saying this as a Navy guy or that I'm an average airline pilot, but there's a lot to be said about putting the plane on the runway a little bit firm, from a safety aspect and from an aspect of dissipating energy and controlling the plane on the ground. And I've seen far too many circumstances where the pilots have tried to and they waste a ton of runway. The old adage that runway behind you. So they waste a ton of runway, and then they end up kind of not getting a great landing anyway. And for me, if it's a safe landing, if nobody's hurt, if I didn't drop the masks out of the ceiling, I'm happy with that, and I can walk away from it. I'm not concerned about it being the smoothest landing in the world, because I know there's a lot of other factors. And when I sit in the back, I think the same way. Some of the crosswinds and things like that, I teach on the Airbus. One of the things I'll tell guys is, the scary YouTube videos on Airbus landings are when people try to cross control it and the computers just almost get a little confused, because you try to land it like a conventional wing down, top rudder type of plane, and that's not the way to land it. And so I tell them, I go, put it on the ground. It drives than it flies in a crosswind. So just get it on the ground, and if it's a little firm, that's okay. But there's a fine line, obviously. Hurt anyone, damage the plane. But there's nothing wrong with a firm landing. So,
So
sorry, trying to
I'm gonna put
keep
in
up and
there
not get my
Wombat.
soapbox.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I got you.
Are you happy to go on for another 25 minutes? Because I think this is a great Q&A.
I'm,
Are you happy to answer more questions, or are you busy?
I'm no, I'm here for you guys. Not boring people to death. And the only other plans I had today was to make sure that I still have a wicked slice in my golf game. So, but I have time for that. So I
Right, guys,
need
we're
to
gonna
show
go
my
on.
son that I can still slice it.
Absolutely, yeah. So, guys, we're gonna go on for another 25 minutes. So, get your questions coming in. This is a great Q&A. So, yeah, put them in the side, and yeah, we'll carry on with that Wombat.
All right, I'll do the best I can. I hope I'm doing okay. Um, where was I here? Was the Lauren? I think I answered it before about the E2 versus the Hawkeye, but it's the for sure the E2 is a lot harder to land on the boat than a Hawkeye, just for a lot of reasons. The friend did a firm landing with no floating. Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm not. It's a law of primacy in aviation, a lot, and with what you learn first is it tends to come back to you when you're in those tough situations. And I'll tell you, my law of primacy was not flaring, so I have to remind myself to flare sometimes. But luckily, the Airbus backs me up, which is another reason why I like the plane. So, Antonio, maybe it's cliche, but what's the best advice you've ever received, and what advice would you give others? I don't think it's cliche. I think it's the main reason I do this is I hope there's somebody out there like me that that hears something I say and it clicks, because there were so many people that helped me out to get to the success that I feel like I've achieved. Um, but the problem, and I'll answer the question in a second, but the problem I think with the today's day and age is that social media paints people to be such a certain way that everybody has it figured out on social media. And that's not the case. And it's tough because you watch this stuff and you see this stuff and you're like, well, everybody's beautiful, everybody has everything go for them, and why is it that I'm not? And I think that makes it tough. um the the piece of advice that I get, I hope people listen, is don't be your own worst enemy. Like, don't beat yourself up. um the We self sabotage so much in this world, and I don't care if it's aviation. If your goal is to fly fighters, be an airline pilot, be a bodybuilder, just be a great dad, go be a computer, it doesn't matter. We take ourselves out of the fight. And it's one of those situations. The story I tell, and my wife's going to laugh at this that I tell this, but one of our first dates, we were sitting on the couch, we were watching a comedy show, and I'm watching this comedian, famous comedian, great comedian, hilarious. And I'm sitting there and I go, I wonder how much they make to do this. And, she's like, I mean, probably pretty good money. Like, he's famous. And I go, well, I could do this. And she looked at me. I mean, we had gone on like 2 dates. She looks at me and she goes, you honestly believe that you could stand up there and do that same job that comedian's doing? And I was like, 100%. And she says to this day that's one of the things she really likes about me. And she says it in a much more flattering way. But what it truly is in my brain, I'm too stupid to understand what my limits are. I've shut that part of my brain off. And I think that's, in a way, important for people, because when you put these false limits on yourself, you're yourself out of whatever goals you want long before you even have an opportunity to achieve them, or even come close, or even have a plan to achieve them. And I think that's probably one of the worst things you can do. It's one of the biggest ways to look back at your life and have regret. And I don't have that because I've tried a million different things and I continue to try things. And, I've had people along the way tell me, there's no way you could write a book. Well, yeah, I can. Obviously, I wrote two. And they did pretty darn well, or they're doing pretty well. I mean, I joke with people like when they meet me and they're like, you wrote a book? And I go, I know, I look like somebody that can't even read a book. Why would I write one? But it's all those things that it's like, don't count yourself out first. There's going to be plenty of people in this world that are going to count you out and knock you down. Don't do their job for them. So that's my advice. Let me try to catch back up. I'm sorry. Do IT's mover about trying to land an F-16 without tail hook down? I don't. That's his DCS stuff. I don't. Is He's much better at that stuff. I think I'm going to meet up with Gonki, and I might get horribly humbled in DCS here very shortly, and I'm going to have to eat a lot of my words on that. Did you ever operate the AIM-7? No, the AIM-7 was before my time. When I got to my Hornet Squadron, though, our coin at the time said we did not have AIM-9s prior to me getting there. We had AIM-9s when I got there, but our legacy coin was the merge because we were just AIM-7 jets before that. So there's a little bit there, but yeah, I've never AIM-7 before my time. Aviation official, do you think the Hawk T1 is overrated? I don't know enough about it to say if it's overrated or not. I think aviation in general, there's a lot of really cool planes out there, but just like everything else, people get on bandwagons, and I'm not sure if that's a particular bandwagon, but that happens with everything, right? It's it's funny. This is probably one of my buddies that's writing now. But I do think that, I think planes are made for certain missions, and it's probably a very respectful plane. I'm just not as educated on it as I should be. So, where are we at here? So, Paulie, hey, this is what made me laugh. I apologize. Hey, Wombat, how do you get through the tiny cockpit door in a Hawkeye with all the flight gear on? It looks tiny. Best wishes. Thanks. It is. And that's something we had to practice. And I will never forget having to go through those drills, because the only way you get out of a Hawkeye, if you're bailing out, is you de-rig the seat, as we would call it. There was a ring you would pull, and you were strapped to the seat. And then as you stood up, the parachute would come with you, right? So the parachute stayed in the seat. You would get in the seat, strap in, but then if it was time to bail out, you'd de-rig it and get up and walk to the door. And one of the issues I had, not being a small guy, is I would get stuck going through the hallway. And everybody was like, well, you got to be able to do it or else you can't fly the plane. And one of the techniques that one of the instructors told me is you would put your arms out in front of you and kind of cross your hands, and it would tighten your shoulders in. And that's how I'd have to walk through the doorway. It worked every time. But it was one of those situations that I'm like, man, if I ever have to bail out of this thing and I don't remember that, I'm going to be taking radio boxes with me and everything else with me as it's hooked onto my sleeves trying to get out of this thing. But I think it would have just been pure adrenaline that got me out. But it is very tiny. The only other way is if we were to ditch the aircraft pilot hatches above their seats, where they would open them and try to swim out. So but yes, going through that door is no joke. So F-14 Calverton, thanks. I don't know if I rock. I'm trying to do my best here. So did I ever serve with Chimpo? I did not, but I do know of him. I've met him. He's a very nice guy. CAG paddles. And he, I think, and I'm biased, but in the world of LSOs, just because there's less E2 LSOs than fighter pilot LSOs, because there's less E2 pilots than there are fighter pilots. Anybody in the E2 world that can make it up to CAG paddles job is impressive, and Chimpo is very impressive and an excellent pilot and a phenomenal LSO. Ray, any good SEER school stories? SEER school, that was a long time ago. So that's our survival school that we go to, and I'll tell you, I reported to survival school in Brunswick, Maine on January 2nd. It was cold. I remember it being very cold. It was 2 weeks of the coldest I've ever been. And thank God there was a bunch of Navy SEALs in my group, or else I'm not sure I'd be here today. Those guys are different individuals. And he is Thank God I had them. So it was a rough training, but important training. So Lauren, how's Rattler doing these days? Looking forward to the next book. I appreciate that. He's he's got things going on, I'll tell you, and I think the next book is going to take a turn that people don't really see. Um, so I'm excited about it. I just need to find the quiet and time to put the story down. One of the things that I've always said is, I write for the hobby of writing. I appreciate the support of it, and all the positive and negative feedback because I learn from it. But the one thing about it is I don't want an author that turns out book after book after book and loses the edge. Because I really truly value the time the reader puts in, because time is something you can't get back. So I'm really trying hard to make it a worthwhile product, which takes a little bit longer. But the but I hope that it's a good product in the end. So sorry to go through quick because I know Mike's what's some of the Jonas or Carrie Lanning's done in radio silence. If yes, how? Well, the case one ones are, and it's something where we're just trained. We're trained early on how to fly around the ship and where to be and what time to be there, and the signals from the ship and the signals from the LSOs. The And it's tough, but we could always revert back to radio if we have to. When you go into case 2, case 3, which is bad weather or nighttime, then you tend to be on the radios more. But case 1, daytime, beautiful day, nobody says a word, it's zip, and we all bring aboard 12 to 15 aircraft in 45-second intervals, and it's pretty magical to do. So, Freckle, the aviation looks coolest, the A5 or the F-14. F-14 wins on everything. Sorry, that's a cool plane. Richie, do you still have the leather jacket with patches like Maverick? I still have multiple flight jackets. I've got my patch jacket that has everything on it. One day my kids will get that, I guess. I have my leather jacket that have my nice patches on it. The one that I miss, and I wish I hadn't lost, I don't know where it went, was I had a black flight jacket when I was a kid after seeing Top Gun. I wore that around the neighborhood on my bike, my black Huffy bike, listening to the Top Gun soundtrack. I don't know what happened to that. Maybe I still have it somewhere, but I doubt it. That's the one I miss. That's the one that I wore that all the way through middle school and high school, believe it or not. And I'm pretty sure I did not impress any of the women in high school wearing that jacket. They all thought I was a giant goofball that would never get to fly airplanes. So I guess I proved them. But I do have my jackets from my day. So, Paulie, how many variants of the E-2 have you flown and major improvements, engines, etc.? I flew the E-2C, primarily Hawkeye 2000, 4-blade and 8-blade were what I flew. Anything past that, that was primarily what I flew in my time, and yeah, that was what I got. So the improvements were there. The 8-blade was pretty cool from just a sustainability aspect, but it was just different. 4-bladed was more mechanically device. 8-blade was more of electronically synced. So I think we might have gotten to the end, or I've been logged off the internet, one or the other. I'm not sure, Mike. So if I got booted off, I apologize. But that is all the questions, I think. I'm sure I missed some. I know there was some about politics and some about UAPs that I didn't answer. I apologize. I've talked enough about them. It's not something I talk about. So it's just not something I want to get 10,000 Twitter messages about what I saw or didn't see or what happened. So
Yeah,
that's what I got.
Absolutely, Wombat. I think what a great Q&A that was. And yeah, thank you very much for coming on the show. And yeah, guys, thank you very much for coming in the chat on the side. Some great questions. But yeah, Wombat, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I always enjoy it. I hope I do it justice. Your channel's amazing. And I always feel like a little bit of a fish out of water doing it. but I appreciate you having me on, and at least letting me have a voice. So
Yeah, it's always great to have you on, like talking about E2 and Hornet, and I'm sure the people who joined us tonight enjoyed it. So yeah, well, Wombat, thank you very much for coming on the show, and guys who joined us in the comments, thank you very much. And yeah, Wombat, before we wrap up, where can we find you online?
So TR Matson's the easiest one-stop shop to find everything. If you're looking for the books or things about me, it's all on there. Merchandise and everything's all on there if you care to want that. And then also, if you're interested in the books, they're everywhere. Amazon, everywhere you can buy anything, any format. They're everything from ebooks to paperback to hardcover to audiobooks. So wherever you get them, I promise if you search me, it's out there. So
Brilliant stuff. Everything will be linked in the description below, guys. But yeah, thanks to everyone who joined us, and Wombat, thank you again.
thank you, sir. I appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Bye.